Welcome back to NOP. Today is a Real Talk Tuesday. It's a Travel Nurse Takeover. If you're new here, my name's John. I'm an ICU travel nurse and I've been doing it for a while. I am excited about this topic and also a little nervous. I don't want to get all lit up on this, but here's the deal. I am talking about the Million Nurse March and the current bipartisan legislation being put in place to try to cap nurses' pay. I'm going to talk about what it means, how I feel about it, and why, even if you're not a healthcare professional, why you should pay attention to it. Stick around. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of it's misconception. People don't really know what all this is about, so we need to bring it up and talk about it. What I did is I went to the different social media pages. There's all sorts of nurses out there that are very discontent with this whole thing and what's going on. And we're talking specifically about the Million Nurse March. It's planned for May 12th. It's going to be at the Freedom Plaza at 10 a.m. If you're going to be there, be there. But there's a lot of confusion about what it's about. So I went directly to the original Facebook page for this event, and this is what I found. These are their main reasons. Number one, nurse-to-patient ratios need to be addressed. Number two, fair and realistic wages for nurses and stopping any kind of legislation for a proposed nurse cap pay. Racism against healthcare workers and violence against healthcare workers. Interestingly enough, there's nothing on here about vaccines, which is one of the biggest misconceptions. This is not what this is about right now. This got started a while ago when a letter was written to the Fair Trade Commission from two executive vice presidents, one from the American Hospital Association and the other from the American Healthcare Association, basically urging the FTC to try to get Congress to enlist different agencies to kind of help with competition and consumer protection authority to investigate these staffing agencies. In a nutshell, broken down, what that means is that those associations feel like these travel nurse agencies have established a monopoly with the nurses being the product. So the hospitals are short-staffed because of a lot of reasons we're going to talk about, and they need staff to take care of their patient influx, which is not really slowing down at all. So they're reaching out to these staffing agencies who have the nurses now, and these agencies are, in their eyes, are saying, well, we have the nurses, we can make whatever we want, so we're going to charge exorbitant prices. I don't necessarily agree with that. This letter initially cited that these staffing agencies are taking around 40% of the fees that are collected from the hospitals, and that simply these hospital systems cannot afford to continue at this staffing agency fees because it's simply unrealistic. Frankly, I find it laughable. They wrote another letter to Jeffrey Zients, who is the COVID-19 response coordinator for the White House, continuing to urge him basically the same thing. But this time they worded it differently so that they said that it was the staffing agencies that are all the problem and not the nurses themselves. They went so far as to say this, and I quote, "Please be sure that our concerns focus directly on the agencies and not the personnel they represent. We are well aware that the variants of the COVID-19 virus and the links of this ongoing pandemic have put a tremendous strain on healthcare personnel, and we commend them for their dedication to their patients and the communities in the face of these challenges." Isn't that sweet? Attaboy. That's what it feels like. Here's a t-shirt. Healthcare heroes. Let me put a sign up for you guys. Throw another pizza party. I told you guys I was going to be passionate about this. All right, make no mistake. Capping rates on the agencies is going to directly affect the nurses' pay as well, so they can say whatever they want. But it basically comes down to the fact that the nurses are going to get capped. According to Toby Millar, who is the vice president of the American Staffing Association, there's actually not any current federal legislation in place. So hopefully our government is being smart enough on both sides to realize that this is a stupid idea. But there is a handful of states that are actually pushing and do have current legislation in place. Oregon, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Kansas, and Kentucky have all introduced legislation seeking to do just that. You guys want to know what I think about this? I think it's utterly ridiculous to cap rates on frontline workers during an actual pandemic, while the hospital executives and the hospital systems administrators themselves continue to make millions of dollars. I feel like it's a stupid scare tactic also to state that these agencies are asking for 40%. You can go online and look up the current public companies like Cross Country and A&M, and you can look in their reports and see their quarterly earnings where they state what their rates are. And they're generally in the mid to high 20s. That's what they take. That's the percentage that they take from the hospitals. These are two very large corporations. I actually looked up my own agencies and found them to be a little bit lower at around 22%. So I find it hard to believe that it's such a major issue. Patient staffing ratios. For ICU nurses, like I am, it's supposed to be 1 to 2, sometimes 1 to 1, depending on how sick the patient is. Progressive care or tele is 1 to 4. Med-surg is generally 1 to 5 to 6 patients. Some of those are with AIDS and some are not. But in these hot spots where COVID is still an issue and the staffing ratios are still really bad, you're seeing ICU nurses caring for 1 to 3, sometimes even 4 patients. Med-surg, it's almost like 1 to 9, and progressive, it affects it across the board. Point of all this is that it's not safe. Racism is still a thing. It's kind of embarrassing that we still have to bring this up, but it permeates the healthcare system, unfortunately. I think it may be getting a little bit better as we continue to try to push to shine light on it, but there's still definitely work that needs to be done in this country. Violence against healthcare workers. So many people don't realize that this is even a thing and how common it is. It gets swept under the rug constantly. I remember going through multiple hospital orientations, both as a staff nurse and a travel nurse, where they talk to you about patient violence. And if a patient gets violent, the first and foremost thing that you're trying to do is to run away. You get away from them. And if you can't get away from them, then your job is to protect yourself. But that does not mean to fight back. It means to try to place objects between yourself and the patient, or to cover your head and neck so they can't beat you into the face. You cannot fight back. You cannot use any kind of martial arts training or any of that kind of silliness on them, because the hospital is liable for what happens. I've been punched, slapped, scratched, kicked, bitten, spit on, you name it. It's happened to me. I know it happens to others. You know, I even had a patient throw poop at me once. More times than not, all these patients are fully lucid and know exactly what they are doing at that time. They should be held accountable. If a police officer gets assaulted like this, it's a felony. Hospital staff and healthcare workers should afford the same. All right, there is definitely a staffing crisis going on right now. That is obvious. Nurses are leaving in droves. It's happening because the work is more difficult than ever. COVID has put such a massive strain on people, but it's not only that. Staff are grossly underpaid for what they do, and while in the past, nurses have consistently been voted as the most trusted vocation, we find ourselves being bombarded by people who think we're public enemy number one now, for things like supporting vaccination, or those who simply don't believe that COVID is a big deal, or still not even a thing. In 2019 and 2020, we were heroes in the public eye, but we now find ourselves frequently drawn into political debates with family, friends, and even other co-workers, as if it wasn't hard enough already. The rate of burnout is astronomically high. Nurses are leaving the profession in droves. NPR actually sometimes calls this the Great Resignation. While many are piecing out, there are some that are trying to travel because it offers a reprieve and a break from this. I mean, frankly, because we're also finally getting paid what we feel like we're worth. It's still hard, but the money does help. So why does this matter to non-healthcare workers, or if you're not a person that works in the business? Because when you or your loved one is in the hospital, you want safe staffing ratios so that your nurse doesn't make any mistakes because they are overwhelmed and working in a danger zone. If they get punched in the face by the guy going through an alcohol withdrawal 2 doors down from you 15 minutes ago, but they know that your med pass is already overdue and they're feeling guilty about it, so instead of reporting it and going down to the occupational health with the way that they're supposed to, they don't, because they know it's not going to do anything to the patient. They feel bad for you, so they push through. Medical mistakes are made by nurses. They do happen, but the frequency is much more common when the nurse is working in an unsafe environment. Legislation should be put forth to try to solve the problem, not make it worse. New grad nurses are leaving the entire profession after only 1 year to 2 years. Leaving the profession, not just changing jobs. And they're going to cap nurse pay? Let me tell you, there's travelers that can afford it. Like, we can take some months off during all of this crisis and whatever legislation. Travel nurses, we're often always talking about, is the well drying up? You know, is the COVID money finally going away? Frankly, I don't think so. But what I do think is that it might be drying up for the hospitals. Their well of nurses is drying up. The staffing ratios are getting worse. It's unsafe in a lot of America's hospitals right now because of issues like this. Why not solve the problem at the core instead of forcing nurses to march on DC to try to get our point across? That's it, guys. If you're interested in learning more about this, check out the Facebook page for the Million Nurse March. It's on there. It's a private group, and you can ask to join. There's also a change.org petition going on to send it to the House so that Nancy Pelosi and everybody else can read about what we feel. Thank you for being here. I do truly appreciate it. Give the video a thumbs up. That always helps. And we'll see you out there.
Toma.